the Death Riders should have been AEW's biggest ever storyline. Instead, it's one of its biggest disappointments, and it's actually making the company worse, not better. It's got no clear purpose, and it's losing momentum so quickly, it's almost going backwards. Today, I want to break down exactly what's going wrong, because on paper, this thing should be huge. But let's rewind for a second, back to August 2024, when Jon Moxley came back from injury. At All Out, he turned on Bryan Danielson alongside Claudio and PAC, which put an end to the Blackpool Combat Club. Moxley kept talking about burning down the forest and rebuilding AEW in their own vision. He said that AEW's original stars were lazy and not living up to the company's potential. It was all kinds of vague, but everyone hoped that he'd explain it a bit better as time went on. Then at Wrestle Dream, Moxley won the AEW World Title, and at that point, everything seemed to be falling into place. This was the moment where their mission should have become clear. They should have explained what burning down the forest actually meant and what rebuilding AEW actually looked like. But unlike with the NWO or the Bloodline, their motive still hasn't really been explained properly. With the NWO, we understood that they wanted to take over WCW, destroy it from the inside, and turn it into their own brand. And the Bloodline was all about family dominance and Roman Reigns keeping his place at the head of the table and at the top of WWE. But with the Death Riders, they still haven't properly explained what their mission is. By burning the forest down, was Moxley talking about getting rid of certain wrestlers or overthrowing Tony Khan? Or was he talking about changing the way AEW operates? We never got a clear answer. And one of the worst things that a wrestling storyline can do is tease something big and then do absolutely nothing with it. Because that is exactly what made TNA such a mess in the 2010s, and AEW is starting to look more and more like a less entertaining version of TNA as every week passes. Months ago, people were throwing around names like Shane McMahon as a possible higher power in this storyline for the group, but that never happened either. The lack of stakes and lack of motivation is why the fans have stopped caring, and because that motive still hasn't been resolved, they're just like any other faction on the roster. Tony Khan has been obsessed with gang warfare for years, and at this point everyone's tired of it because he clearly doesn't know what he's doing. We've had the Inner Circle, the Pinnacle, the Jericho Appreciation Society, the Blackpool Combat Club, the list goes on and on. Moxley winning the world title should have pushed the storyline forward, and that's where things should have accelerated. But by winning it, he's actually managed to devalue it instead. I assume when he was hiding the belt in a suitcase, it was supposed to generate heat, but he's just making fans forget about it entirely. He's actively devaluing the World Championship. Moxley explained in an interview with Renee that he kept the title hidden because he believed that the fans didn't deserve to see it. Well, here's a reality check for you, Mox. The fans don't give a shit whether you can see the belt or not. And it's not like he's been defending it in huge matches either. He's beat the likes of Orange Cassidy and Powerhouse Hobbs, but it's really hard to care about those matches when the storyline's dead on arrival. If the Death Riders are going to be taken seriously as a dominant force in AEW, it would help if the members of the group looked and felt like a proper unit. Instead, they don't even seem like they belong in the same locker room, let alone the same faction. There's no chemistry between them or a shared identity apart from wearing stupid white t-shirts that look completely out of place, by the way, in this kind of faction. They're called the Death Riders, for God's sake. They look like a bunch of models. It seems like there's no real reason for them to be standing next to each other every week because of that lack of proper motive. They all look completely out of place. They're like the background artists in the Jon Moxley show. And Marina Shafir doesn't do anything meaningful either. If she's meant to be the enforcer, then why isn't she kicking ass like Chyna did in DX or Rhea did in the Judgment Day? So none of the members are convincing or effective, but ultimately it all comes back down to Moxley. Those guys are just the backup dancers, but he is front and centre. His whole gimmick is supposed to be a violent, unhinged force unleashed on AEW, but if you actually listen to his promos, they all sound the same and none of it actually means anything. And the craziest thing is Moxley's lunatic character in WWE was actually somehow better than this. We all complained about it at the time and we were excited for him to go to AEW, but my God, how was he better then than he is now? I always want to hold Tony Khan accountable for the shit show of a wrestling promotion that he's running, but according to reports, this entire storyline has been Moxley's idea and TK is just letting him do whatever he wants. And that explains a lot, because when a wrestler has too much control, the product stops being about what works for the audience and starts being about whatever the wrestler themselves thinks is cool. We've seen this before. When Kevin Nash was booking himself in WCW, he put himself over everyone else and protected his own image at the expense of the show. And now we seem to be seeing the same thing with Moxley. He's running a faction where he gets to do all the talking, he wins all the important matches and holds the world championship. Nobody's forcing him to evolve this storyline or make it make sense because he's calling the shots and he's just entertaining himself. And now we've got Moxley versus Copeland for the title in a main event that nobody wants. The fans are already turning on Moxley, and Copeland, I refuse to call him Cope by the way because it's bloody stupid. Copeland has previously said that he wanted to put over new talent in AEW at this late stage in his career, and yet here we are with another main event that no one cares about and a shot at the title that Copeland never actually earned. All of this is a reflection of how Tony Khan has got no control over his own company. It's never a good sign when the inmates are allowed to run the asylum. But in the end, it wouldn't matter if this whole thing wasn't just dead on arrival. If it was working, if it made sense, and if people cared about it, if they were giving the fans a reason to care about it. When Jon Moxley first arrived in AEW, he was one of the most beloved wrestlers in the world. Fans were ecstatic that he'd finally broken free from WWE's shackles. There was even talk of him being the next Stone Cold Steve Austin because he had that same anti-establishment vibe that Austin was known for. But somehow in AEW, the comparison has faded away. It comes to something when we want him to go back to WWE and become Dean Ambrose again. The goodwill from the fans towards him is draining away fast, and if nothing changes soon, it's going to turn into total apathy. I say it's time to throw the Death Riders on the scrap heap and forget that this nonsense ever happened.